My name is Mike Ostler, and we have here some of the memorabilia from my time in the Royal Air Force, 1956 to 1968. This is my flying logbook, which covers all the training and sorties I flew from 56 through to 1968. You can see that it's luxuriously bound in leather with gold lettering, and this is produced for anyone who served in the Royal Air Force in Singapore, where the prisoners in Changi jail had a workshop and they were desperately looking for activity, so they put them to good use to bind books in the prison that is at the eastern end of the island and was in fact renowned, I suppose, as a prisoner of war camp during the Second World War. But after the war, lots of local people were occupied the cells, and these are the ones that the authorities were giving training to. So we were allowed to go from the Royal Air Force with our flying logbooks, which is a fully detailed month-by-month listing of all the places that we visited and how long it took and the time we took off and landed. Everything like that is in the book as a record. Obviously, this goes with the aircrew as they move from squadron to squadron. Squadrons kept their own records called the authorization book, which listed all the same information that you'll find in my individual one. So it's the spare copy, if you like, that I have with me. Also, we have some photographs here of the Shackletons that I drove, or at least I travelled in. I was a crew down the back. The Shackletons had 10 crew members. There were 2 pilots, 2 navigators, and an engineer that looked after the fuel and the engines, checked all the meters and did all the technical stuff. But there were 5 of us virtually down the back of the aircraft, doing the things that the aircraft was meant to do, such as maritime reconnaissance, search and rescue. We'd be looking out the windows, we'd be manning the radar, we'd be manning the radio. In the early days we used the Morse key a lot. Later on we went over to RT voice. The other things that we did was photography. We passed flares out through a chute at the back of the aircraft to mark with smoke things on the surface of the water if we were searching for a dinghy. If we're searching for submarines, of course, we had to take a more active role. We had sonar equipment for detecting submarines. In some areas we still had the nose guns fitted, which we could use in an offensive manner. And and we also cooked in the galley from time to time. If you're flying over 10 hours, in fact I think my longest flight was about 17 hours, you really need more than a cheese sandwich and a cup of coffee. So we had to take dry rations with us and make up in a huge saucepan, make up a hot meal. My Atlantic stew is still talked about, but I'm not going to give you my secret recipe.
Why not?
Well, I made a mistake one day and I'd emptied all the tins into the big pan, and to make it easier I took all the labels off the tins first. I poured it in, the steak lumps, the carrots, the potatoes, everything was in there, and the gravy and the soup, mixed it all up. Lovely meal, everyone loved it. Then when we came to have the tea and coffee, instead of the can of milk, I had a can of chicken soup. So I put the milk in the stew, no one noticed, and we were left 10 hours from Kinloss in the north of Scotland, up in the Arctic, with no naffy we could call into, stuck over the sea for 10 hours, and all we had was black coffee, black tea, and a tin of chicken soup. That's why I said it's a well-renowned recipe. I think they're probably still teaching the students these days, don't take the labels off until you definitely want the content of the tin. That's a good lesson for us all. Right, that's that one. Now what else do we have? Oh, here's the crew, the motley crew in Singapore. In the front of the aircraft, as you can see, it's a 4-engine monster, the Shackleton, based on the old Lancaster bomber from the Second World War. We had the bomb bay for dropping torpedoes and mines onto any enemy submarine. We were fitted with automatic cameras. Also, we had handheld cameras that we could use to take pictures of interesting shipping. A lot of my flying was done during the Cold War. And a lot of the photographs I took were Russian trawlers, only they were pretending to be trawlers. They were intelligent gathering devices. And we got to know them. They'd be sailing around in a fleet of 50 trawlers, perhaps, Russian trawlers, and one of them didn't have seagulls following it. So we knew immediately that that was the one that was full of the Russian intelligence agents. So we would go immediately make a beeline to the one with no seagulls looking for fish bits and take photographs of that one. And they got really upset, I think, because they used to shake their fists at us when we actually got to them, as if to say, look, you've found us. So that's how that was the game we used to play. We used to photograph them before they could cover up their fancy aerials to try and work out, or at least so our intelligence officers could try and work out what they were trying to record or what they were listening to. And it was a game, really, of cat and mouse. Apart from that, which mostly I did in the north of Scotland, around Norwegian coast to Iceland. When we weren't up there doing that, we were on search and rescue missions, or occasionally we were allowed to fly an air show. We did one at in Shetland Islands, which I remember was very good, and we also did one in Australia, which was equally good. And people used to come and visit us afterwards because it was such a large aeroplane and 10 of us on the crew. There was always someone around to show people around. Well, okay, so we've got a navigator there. In fact, it'd be easier if I penned them. There's a navigator. That tall gentleman is Keith Dean. He was the captain and the main pilot. That young lad there was the co-pilot, or second pilot. That was the second navigator. And then this was one of my signallers teams. So there's a signaller there, and a signaller there, and a signaller there, and a signaller there. And in the middle of that lot is me, and I was called the AEO, or the Air Electronics Officer. And I had to run the rotor system for the signallers at the back, so that we shared all the jobs between us. You can't look at the radar screen for more than about 45 minutes before you start getting dots before the eyes. So we used to recycle everyone every 45 minutes, basically. Particularly the radar or any other electronic machine is better to have a fresh pair of eyes at it. Radio, you could sit on the radio, you could do 2 shifts, you could do 3 hour and a half or longer actually on the radio. That wouldn't be so intense, and you're certainly not using your eyes so much. But if you're using what we call the Mark 1 eyeball to search through the window for a dinghy or a survivor in a life jacket or anything small, you couldn't really look out the window for longer than about 45 minutes. The eyes start playing up a bit, unreliable. So we would cycle around every 45 minutes, generally speaking. That was how it worked. And we could do any extra tasks that the aircraft was tasked to do. I can remember once from Kinloss in the north of Scotland, we were asked to fly a couple of policemen. So we thought, well, what on earth are we doing over the coast, over the sea, with a couple of policemen? And they said, oh, we want to try a gadget. And so they're on their radio, this special radio they brought with them, and I coupled them into an aerial, and they were using this to talk to the ground. So I said, when we landed, I wanted to find out what this is all about. And they said, oh, we're trying out a new technique. We've had a lot of criminals and crooks coming up into the Highlands of Scotland, and they've come up from Glasgow, or they've come up from London even. And we thought that if we spoke on our radios in Gaelic, that lot wouldn't understand what we were on about. So we said, well, why did you come in the aircraft to try that out? And they said, well, we just felt like a ride. So if you hear Scottish policemen on their radios talking to each other in Gaelic, it's because they suspect that the criminals that are listening to what's going on are probably from the East End or somewhere.